Welcome to the Mind Sensei Podcast. I'm your host, Peter Taz, and I'll be taking you on a journey through the world of martial arts and introduce listeners to some of the most aspiring and knowledgeable practitioners from around the world. Whether you're a seasoned martial artist or a curious beginner, or just enjoy hearing a great story, the Mind Sensei Podcast Down Under is something for everyone. So tune in, sit back, and let us take you on a journey through the world in martial arts. So welcome to the Mind Sensei Podcast, Mr. Marty Zananovich, author of Edge of Reality Evolution, a new book that's out, available on Amazon and other platforms. Excellent book. I highly recommend for everyone. If you're a practitioner or want to know anything about blades or knives, definitely the book to get. It offers a comprehensive exploration of history of knives from lithic ages to modern times and delves into practical applications of situational awareness. It's a guide ideal for those interested in martial arts seeking to enhance their understanding and skills of knife awareness and situational awareness as essential life skills. So welcome to the podcast, Mr. Z, or Sifu Z, as affectionately known by everyone.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Peter. I appreciate you having me on. It's always a pleasure getting to chat with you and catch up.
Yeah, the problem is we do tap yet.
Well, we do chat. Yes, we do. And it's enjoyable. We don't get enough time together to enjoy each other's company.
Definitely. Let's get started. Let's talk about how the book came to be.
It started out as a passion. I was asked by a lot of people to put something in writing that related more to knives. And some people would ask me about knife fighting, better understanding about knife defense. And I kept thinking about it, and I listened to some of the sage that Guru Dan Inosanto stated in our classes, and how cautious he is in relating and getting that information out when it comes to knives. So I thought better set to do something with knife defense and knife awareness rather than teaching somebody how to just go into straight fighting, teach them how to go in straight uh, self-defense type mode with that, and give a better understanding about the blade and the ramifications from that.
Reading through the book, you've got quite a few topics it covers. It's pretty concise with a lot of stuff that it has in it. It goes all the way through, talks about how did you organize the structure and go through, like, to put it together. Like, I'm looking at this and it looks like a humongous job to put it together in some sort of logical order.
It was a it was a labor of love and passion, and I tell you what, it was that fine line between love and hate. By the time I was going through it, I wanted it to be, number one, give a history of the blade so people that have at least an understanding where it came from. I wanted to give an evolution of how a blade was perceived in earlier days. It was perceived more as a tool than a weapon, although it was utilized as a weapon too. But I wanted to give that vast understanding and how times changed the look of the blade as far as usage of it, and how people could attain it pretty easily and then utilize it. So I wanted to give a full overview of that and how to view it from a different set of eyes.
We talk about practical applications in the book, and philosophy is what I like about it as well. Can you give us a bit more information on that without revealing too much about what's in your book? But
the knife itself, I wanted to give an idea of a little bit of the usage and how to be aware of that knife. But it tied into the philosophical views of it. So many times we hear about knife fighting, we hear about knife usage, we hear, people having easy access to getting a blade, and we've all used a knife at one time or another in our lives. Cutting food, using it to cut open a package for various things as a tool. What I wanted to get across was, when we do that, it comes with a morality training, and a lot of people don't see that. They think the glitz of it maybe from the John Wick movies or the other show and tell on TV, they get a different perception of the blade. There's nothing glitzy about a blade. When you have a blade in your hand, it's a different type of mentality that goes on, and putting the right thing in the wrong hands is deadly. I mean, if you think about that blade, you don't have to be experienced to cut somebody with it. You can just be a little crazy and have the intent, level up high enough that there's going to be some damages. And if you think you can handle it, a lot of times you haven't trained for it. You can open yourself up to a bad ending, which is not good.
What I've noticed with the blade is that there's a lot of physical and psychological effects that come with it. Pete, like you said, Pete, the glitz and glamour of the movies, really, glorifies what it is. But in reality, it's so far from the truth. And people's perception of what knives are really like is just crazy. Like they think it's like a dance, but in reality, once that first cut is made, everything changes. The whole getting dragged back to reality. This is what I like about, the name of the book, which I'll ask you about, where the name of the book comes from. I'm sort of getting a long way around to asking you about where the name of the book came from. But, I sort of, from my experience, we all have what we call a glorified view of it, from movies and from what you're seeing. But when reality kicks in, I think, like your book says, you come from the edge of reality back into the real world.
But and that's how the title did, come to be. I wanted people to understand about the edge, a knife, and get a better perception of what really that knife can do. And then I wanted it to be real. So I wanted to have that reality of understanding and get a better concept of blade awareness so they'd know how to do it. And evolution it's how it evolved from a mostly a tool to a weapon, and the usages of it's just gone way over the top with people's mindset. It's such a different mindset to pick up a blade and be up close and personal versus having a gun and shooting somebody. And I'm not an advocate of either one to do. I just want to, make that clear. But what I do see, to shoot, you're not up close and personal. And there's gun shootings that go on. It's number one in the world now, deaths by a gun. But the blade follows close behind, blade and blunt objects. The problem with the blade is you've got a different mindset with the user of a blade. They're not afraid to get up close and personal. They're not afraid to get bloody. They're not afraid to really puncture and hear that last breath. It's a totally different mindset. And to defend off a blade, with an attacker, you have to meet that, with the minimum of the same type of mentality, and if not elevated, or else you're going to be in dire straits. You really are. It's just, there's no nice way to go about a knife fight. There really isn't.
People say, that's a bit extreme or that's a bit too much. But it's when, like you just said, the other way around, they've got a knife. Their intent is to kill or permanently maim you. Pretty much kill if they're going to pull a knife. The whole situation changes. And I think that affects people psychologically as well. Like most people will freeze. They'll hit that freeze function, or so it's a bit crazy that I think Mr. Pick puts it really well. He says you need to have already made up your mind in your values on how far you're going to want to go, because you can't do it on the spot. You're going to fall to low.
Sure. Yeah, if you pull it there with a knife, the knife has no mechanical features to it, a straight blade. Once it's unsheathed, there's no on button, there's no off button. It's going out for one purpose. And once you draw that thing, you pretty much stated what you're going to do with your intentions there. And I agree with that statement. You're going to know what you're going to do prior to that. And is pretty sad. A lot of people think they'll pull it to scare somebody away, and I've had people tell me that, and I tell them, "You're better off not even carrying a knife." We had one of our other black belts down at the academy, and he was probably in his mid-20s. Guy was a great boxer, young man, great. He decided to break up a fight because that's what he does. He just had a great heart. So he went to break it up, and then one of the guy's buddies came up and stabbed him from behind. And this guy's a talented individual. He's talented in boxing. He was a black belt level in the Filipino martial arts. So he was not without, but his back was turned, splitting up a fight. He had another person come in, stab him in the back, killed him. And it happened all too quick. And there's too many stories like this out there. And the problem is with the knife, a lot of times you're not going to see it coming. You know, if a person's going to pull a knife on you and they get within that 3-foot range, which is arm length, we call it the red zone, bad things are going to happen. You're not going to know they're stuck. We're not training people to become an assassin. That is not where we're at. We're teaching martial art. We're teaching a martial art that has knife, stick, flexible weapons within that. And it comes with a morality training that should be, really adhered to. So, when we're teaching it, we teach the completion of the art with all the weaponry and not, but we have to really teach that morality training within that so they have a respect for that blade and not give it to the wrong people.
So in your book, you talk about situational awareness, which you give quite a bit of information on that, which I think a lot of people walk around with their heads in the sky. Can you give us a little bit of information on that area or your thoughts?
The situational awareness is a lot of it. Just being aware of your environment, being aware of, what you're wearing. If it isn't, if you got a knife assailant, if you have a leather jacket on, they're not going to be having as easy a time when they're doing slashing on you. If they're coming at you to stab you and you know it's there, you need to be aware of your surroundings, what you can utilize as a weapon if you can't get away. I'm talking if you can't get away. If you have a cup of coffee in your hand, if you have a book in your hand, to throw it and just get that second you need, just that split second to react, get away, defend yourself, depending on what the situation is and how much time you have available to you. But you do not have a lot of time once you start getting into that close proximity. If you can, and you're going somewhere, be aware of the surroundings. Look at what you're doing. Be aware of the people you're hanging around with. If you're going to get dropped off by a cab in a certain area, be aware of what you're doing and what you're asking for. Before you even get in the car, make sure, you've done a little bit of due diligence, whether it's an Uber or whatever you have, for a ride. Stay into well-lit areas. If you have to use something, you've got weapons on you, whether it's your jacket, your belt, books, coffee, you can pick up things, that's surrounding, if there's something on the ground you can utilize. There's a lot of things that you can take into consideration to try to save yourself. But once that contact goes, the longer you're engaged trying to disarm them or control it, the less your chances are going to be to survive in many cases.
We didn't discuss, for listeners that don't know you, your history and things like that. So for those of our listeners that don't know Sifu Z, that have been hiding under a rock, we just want to introduce a little bit about Mr. Z's previous training. He's currently a 9th degree American Kenpo master. I think the title is at 9th, isn't it, Marty?
I'm an advanced student.
At 10. Yeah, see, I know you don't like saying it. It's just me ribbing you, right?
I know, yeah, but I expect nothing less.
I know you'll get me back at camp, but that's all good.
I will. I can't wait.
He's also a certified instructor in Filipino martial arts, John Fun, Kung Fu, JKD, Salat, and comes from us all the way from California, USA. Affectionately known as Sifu Z to all of his friends and students. He shares a passion with leading and instructing in the Kenpo system in a spirited way, while blending cutting-edge Filipino and other arts into enhancing mind-body experience. So for those who don't know you, we might get you to do a short summary of where you came from and what you did. I know you started exploring judo at age of 13 and work your way into Mr. LaBounty. And I know Mr. Jimenez is also where you started as well. So just give us a brief overview of where you started from to give our listeners a bit of an idea.
Yeah. Growing up in a small town, you're always in scraps and skirmishes, and that was always the way of life for us. I liked the judo, but when I started taking judo, I wasn't really getting fulfilled in that because I felt like something was missing. And they opened up a school next to my mom and dad's, and little did I know it was a LaBounty Lady school. But I had no clue what it was, other than they're kicking and punching, and it looked like fun to me. So I started there. Stayed there, got through my black belt, moved on at that point in time to Mr. Richard Huck Planas, and I've been with him to date. So I've been with him 45, 50 years, some long time. And he and I both kind of look at each other and can never figure it out. But he doesn't blame me all the way for losing his hair either. So, I mean, that's a good thing. But in the interim there, he was teaching me a little bit about the stick and knife Filipino arts too. And then his brother, I studied with Ed Planas for quite a while. He was under the Cabalan system, which was taught by Ramiro Estelila. And I stayed there for several years doing that in addition to my Kenpo. And then it came to a point in time where I wanted to continue on and learn more. And I asked him if I could go and start studying at the Inosanto Academy with Guru Dan Inosanto. And he gave me the blessings. I'm still at the academy, still taking lessons. I've trained with the Dog Brothers for a few years over there too, full contact stick fighting, which was an education from Guru Mark Denny. And then I've also studied some Blit Walk with Nene Gabakayan in the Los Angeles area. So that's a brief overview. And I continue my training at the academy. I'm still active in the Kenpo world, and learning all the time.
So ever since I've known you, you've always had an affinity for weapons. Before we continue, we might as well hear about the time that you shut down the airport, which is a pretty cool story that you would get by the campfire, but it's good to share with the world, I think.
Okay. Now this is the story with what now that they yeah.
Where you shut down the airport when you're carrying a bag full of weapons through your carry-on.
Well,
Is there more than one episode that I don't know about?
well, yeah, but I'm not going to give you all those right now. We were in Tucson, Arizona, and I was going up to Mr. LaBounty was having a seminar up in Seattle with I think it's Matt Sipes up there, and he had me go up there. So I was taking one of my students up with me, Mike Remine, and we were at the Tucson airport, and they were saying, "Hey, don't worry about carrying your stuff on board and everything else. You can carry all your weapons and everything else." And I'm thinking, okay, well, it's all dull anyway. So, well, first stop, they turned it back. That didn't work. So then we started going back through the airport again, and my carry-on bag, I had my belt in there, and I had it all folded nice and neat. Had my Walkman at the time where you had all the wires and everything else going to it, and a few other things in there too, which I didn't think was too bad. But when it went through the radar, they stopped. They stopped everybody there. Of course, Mike's over there looking at me, laughing, like, "Hey, you got stuck. I didn't. I'll see you up in Seattle." Okay. So they started going in the bag. Then they called for a code 6, I think it was. And I had no idea what it was, but all of a sudden there's 6 officers that come up there, and they shut down both of the lines going in there for the X-ray. And they told me to lean against the table. And I'm thinking, lean against the table. This is not sounding very good here. So I put my hands on the table and leaned over there. "No, you don't have to do that yet. Just sit back towards it." So I'm sitting there, and of course, Mike's on the outside laughing at me, and people are starting to get mad. But 45 minutes later, the airport, there is nothing happening. Yeah, they shut it down big time. And then finally, one of the officers came in there, and I knew him. He was one of my students. I didn't know that at the time because he was way in the back. And he recognized me, and then he came and vouched for me. And they saw my belt and it looked like it was explosives the way it was folded. And he said, hey, the next time when it goes to these x-rays, you got to just throw your stuff in there. He said, it was so nice and neat and tidy the way you packed it up. It looked like a big cake of explosive. And plus the wiring and the Walkman, of course, those days when you had wires and everything else on there. And of course, Mike is throwing digs at me. And then after we got through, my student, took me over to the side and we were talking about it. And he said, man, you really pissed off a lot of people here doing that. I said, blame Remind. It wasn't my fault. He's the one that said I could do it. And of course it was a he said, she said show then. Oh my God. We missed flights. Everybody was mad at us. We go get a soda and stuff afterwards. They're looking at us like, don't serve these guys. They're hoodlums, Get them out of here. Come take a cab up there. Hitchhike, walk.
I did take a lesson from your episode. And when I went across recently to Western Australia, I had to, as I always, take my belt on, carry on, just in case I lose your luggage, right? But I folded it up and tied it so it was not.
It looked like it.
Didn't look like a brick of explosives.
Yeah, that was the wrong thing to do. I found out, and then of course I made a smart aleck comment night, and they were pulling this thing out. What is this thing in here? I say, that's near and dear to me, And that didn't go over too good at all because the way it came across just was not good. They were serious about it. I'm trying to make light about it. Everybody around the airport is just pissed off me just breathing, the same air they're breathing,
Did not have a bag full of weapons as well?
I had a bag full of weapons. I had sticks, I had swords, I had knives, and that got booted first. And that was the easy part. It was the carry-on bag that got me in trouble.
Right.
That was one that was very compact and nice and neat. So I had to recheck in that bag earlier, and everything was not going, according to plan. Of course, I should have never listened to Mike and took his word for it, him knowing, and I knew better than that, but I didn't anyway. Shame on me.
Yeah, nice. Okay. So in your book, you cover a lot of different topics. How it started as a tool, turned into a weapon, and how people would carry it throughout the ages. So if you can just give us a little bit of your thoughts on different types of carrying, because when I came to the States, it seems to be a lot of people carry knives, and over here you can't carry a knife. It's $1,000 fine if you're caught with a knife on you. Doesn't matter what the knife's like. It used to be a 3-inch blade. Now it's nothing. Unless you have a lawful reason. It has to be a good lawful reason.
Well, I think the same thing, applies here. It depends on the different regions you're in, and the counties. You need to know the laws of each specific area because there's some areas you have to be really attentive to, or else you're going to be in trouble. In the older days, people would have a knife in their pocket and they'd use it for opening letters. They do it for a little tool, and it was just something you normally would carry along, with your persona, just to have and use as a tool. As it evolved, knives started getting bigger and people started using it because there's easy access. Then the folders came into being. Then the carries came on with the little clips, and it changed the whole perspective of a carry knife. Problem is with that, a lot of times, if you don't practice drawing that knife when you do have the need for it, it's not going to come out that quick. And I see that with people. I had a parent, and we were at a school function, and it was one of my kids' buddies' dads, and he was showing me his knife, and when he pulled it out, he was talking about this new buck knife he got and how great it was, and I'm sitting there thinking, okay, number one, he wasn't really in tune with knives and the customs and the different type of blades available. And I asked him, I said, why are you carrying that thing? He said, well, in case I ever get stuck at a gas station or something, I can pull it out and scare somebody away. I said, do yourself a favor. I said, leave it at home next time. I said, you're going to end up getting yourself in trouble there. Somebody's going to take it away and, do some bad things with it back to you. You don't want to be doing that. And I said, you don't practice it. You don't know the martial arts with it. You have no experience. And I said, could you really stick somebody? He said, no, I just want to scare somebody away. I said, that's number one, don't do that to start with. And I said, there's a whole bunch of, don't do's after that, so it's, you need to educate yourself about the blade and about the situations that could hamper from that. And then they talk about it. I mean, young kids, they'll carry a blade to school sometimes, young kids, in thinking that they're going to protect themselves. It gives them that rite of passage because they've got something. And a few of them will pull it on somebody, and it's a scary thought. The blade awareness needs to be heightened. And I believe that with all my heart in the school systems, and depending on what region you're in, even in California, the areas you're in are more prone to have blades, being carried in the schools. And I'm talking elementaries. There's a few elementaries you go on too, but from teens and up, you have to really be aware of that and give them an education of what not to do.
Let's talk a little bit about general rules of knife. So if you have your basic gospel rules, general, rule number one, don't do this. If you could, I know you've got some rules. Share with our audience. They have no idea.
Well, there's a lot of be aware of that blade and what it could do. I think it's anywhere from, you number one, you don't want to train with a live blade. I think that's a first starter, which is foremost. So many people think they can handle a blade and put some tape on it and hopefully that'll do a job. I think that the handling of a knife, don't point a knife. It's like similar to a gun. If you're going to draw it, point it, threaten somebody at it, those are not on the top to-do list. I mean, you have to treat that blade with respect and utilize it, for the proper intentions. I'm trying not to get into the meat and potatoes of a lot of it too, as we have rules and principles in Kenpo. We talk about how you move correctly and how you can maneuver around. The same thing applies in the Filipino martial arts too. We're very, very cautious about working the center line because you don't know what that backup weapon's going to bring. Backup weapon meaning if you have a knife in the right hand, the left hand's still alive, and if you're working the center line, you're going to be, needing to be more aware of what's going on with that blade. There's a lot of rules and principles that do go with that weapon type environment, just as we have in our Kenpo. There is no difference as far as to-dos and not to-dos as far as that goes. It's the same thing like we do in our creed. We don't want to abuse, if we have to, and if we have to defend our families or our loved ones, it's better to have an understanding of that blade. And that way you'll have a better understanding of what's coming at you. If you don't understand the structure of other arts or bladed type arts and how they would react, then you're missing something just having empty hand concepts, which we have. But I think you need to broaden your base of knowledge and awareness of what that blade can do in a proper hand or a not so proper hand. You need to have that understanding.
So in terms of knife training concepts, I know you have a few ideas behind that. We've discussed this before where we say, if you don't have flow, you're dead in the water. But just provide us with a little bit of knowledge training concepts.
Probably a base training system to start in is learning how to use a stick properly. And that comes from a Filipino type art. I mean, those arts have been tried and proven and written and read on the beaches and then washed away. They're a true art when it comes to the militaristic, type usages of it. When you're working with a stick, we're learning how to do stroking patterns. We're learning how to do fluidity type drills on how to approach an attacker. And when you do put a blade in your hand, you're going to tighten up your motions a lot more. And you want to get your hands with the drills, teaching you how to supercharge your hands a little bit more. And I use that term just because I've been taught that term at the academy. What it does, it gives you more of an awareness of where that blade's coming from and how to react from that. And you'll start learning the different issues that come along with that blade from the flow drill and how to maneuver your body around it to minimize your abilities to survive a little bit longer and to get to the point where you can either do a disarm if you can. Disarms are not that easy to get, in place. People go for it right away and it's got to be set up and flow into it. But you have to understand how the body flows with that blade, and you'll have a better understanding. It'll even open up a better learning perspective to your Kenpo, because what it'll do, it'll open the lines up a lot more because you'll see the lines more predominantly. And I was told that by Mr. Planas, Huck. And he says, when you start looking at your stick flow and your knife flow, you're going to see the lines in Kenpo come out a lot clearer to you, and you get a better understanding to it. But the margin for error is so minimal with a bladed art. A stick, you're going to have a little bit more, but you'll start seeing and understanding how that concept comes into play.
Let's have a chat about knife consequences. I know that's a topic you cover in your book. There's a lot of consequences that come with the involvement of the knife. Like I always keep saying to my guys, never carry a weapon that you're not ready to have taken from you and used on you.
I think that goes back what we're talking about, just the prior question you had too, getting a better understanding of the structure of the other systems. And I think that's a key point you just hit on. With that blade, the margin for errors is minimal, and you apply a lot of empty hand type self-defense to that. I think it's an introduction of how to, but I think it's breaking a lot of rules when you start flowing into a typical knife type scenario. Will some of it work? Anything will work if you can pull it off, and your athletic abilities and your tenacity to survive. I think those are all parts of the elements when you're looking at that. The consequences of that blade is, number one, we talked earlier. If you have a folder in your pocket, do you draw it regularly? Do you know how to draw it regularly? How would you defend off it if somebody did pull it, quickly, and you're in a tight range where you couldn't react that easily? I think these are all scenarios that need to be worked. Once that blade comes out, it is very unforgiving, very unforgiving. They say if you're attached and you're that close and somebody's coming in and they're stitching at you straight in and out thrust, those are the most deadly. Slashes, if you have a jacket on, you may not get that full cut of it. And you may, depends on the areas they hit, just by accident, could be deadly. You don't know that. There's so many different aspects of that blade that you have to be aware of, and the consequences are deadly. It depends if they hit a vital area. You can be going across the other side, in 2 to 5 seconds sometimes. When we did that classic camp at Graham's, I think I did it 4 years ago or 6 years ago.
Probably 6 was pre-pat 2019.
Yes,
6 years ago.
Doc was there from
Yeah, Dr. Nigel.
Jersey Islands.
Yeah.
Yeah, Doc Nigel. He was there, and it was good because I did those no-lie blades, and I had everybody engage for 5 seconds. And when they stopped, I had him analyze, obviously he's a physician, who's left. And it's amazing who was dying faster because of the more specific focused cuts than the other one. If they were on the arm, if they were high enough, they had a little bit longer to cross over to the other side. If they were hitting in vital areas, he was the first one to tell you, hey, after you're gone. Yeah, you're dead, and you died a few seconds later. So the consequences of the blade are tough consequences. And I agree with what Mr. Pick said earlier too. You've got to be ready to use it, but the consequences of using that, you're not only, from a knife awareness type standpoint, you're not only eliminating that person, that threat in front of you, if it was a threat, but you're really starting to affect the people that they're attached to also. Whether it be in the neighborhood, whether the families. This day and age, the culture has changed. They're not going to allow you to get away with just hitting their cousin over the head or their buddy from a street gang or something. there will be consequences to that besides the legal, aspects of it too, which are tough enough. If you pull it, you stab somebody. I know they always say it's better to be carried, be judged by 12 and carried by 6. I get that saying. But I think before you even get to that point of asking that question, you want to try to avoid it at all costs, but you want to have a working understanding so it'll guide you and you can guide others on what not to do or how to prepare for that worst case scenario if you have to.
Correct. I think that the point you made about we always have in Kenpo, better to be, tried by 12 than carried by 6. I always say it's better to be running from 1.
Yeah, and there's a lot of truth to that too, and I state that in the book too. It's if you have a choice to turn and get away from it, by all means, get away from that situation. And the key thing is before you have to turn and run, because you may not be able to, you want to assess and be aware of the situation that you're putting yourself in. And sometimes you can't change that situation. I mean, you may be in a crowd and somebody may be coming in with a blade, and if they had the intent to poke you, you're going to get stuck, whether you like it or not, and you won't even know you got stuck for the most part. There was a story one time, and I can't remember, it was back in the 1500s, when the queens, they wore those tight corsets around and they sewed themselves real tight. She was getting on to the ship, to sail away, and then somebody came by with a needle. And a lot of times those thick needles I use, they go in and they'll puncture the lungs. And she thought somebody just bumped into her. Well, 30 minutes later, she died. But this is the problem you have with a blade or the intent of somebody to hurt. You can't control that. You try to keep yourself away from that situation, but sometimes, you're just a victim to the circumstance, which is unfortunate. But in this day and age that we're in now, you want to try to pick your areas you frequent and how you participate in your transportations and your walking, your routes that you're taking, and what you can do to try to mitigate those issues that come onto you.
Yeah, definitely. Let's talk a little bit. You cover knife anatomy in the book, and I always find it fascinating. A lot of people don't really know the knife, don't know the anatomy of it, don't know the application of other parts of the knife.
Yeah, and it's interesting, and I just gave a brief overview of it, where you have the spine in the back of it, if you have a double blade or, how the blades are sharpened, if you have a guard. A lot of times, people will get a boot dagger and won't have guards on it, and they think they can plunge away. Well, if they hit a bone by accident, the hand's gonna go down on the blade, and then you're gonna be losing a few digits, or they're gonna feel like when they start sewing them up, that they didn't fall up all the way. So there's good things to know about that. A folding knife, you should understand, how the opening of it is. If you're gonna snap it into position, from a draw, if you can, how you would adjust those blades, how you want to carry it. A lot of times I see people with a folder, they'll loosen it up and leave it in their back pocket. They loosen that screw a little bit too much for a faster deployment. I've seen that blade work its way out when it's still in your pants and poke you right in the hindquarters pretty hard. And you're not even gonna be aware of it until you sit down or you move the wrong way. And then all of a sudden, not so happy a day, that goes on. So I think, a lot of things with the locking mechanisms, the understanding of the opening, it's a gravity feed or what type of folding knife that you're utilizing, and if it's legal at all, or if it's a kitchen knife, or if it's not. Then if you're going to use a knife, and we talked about a little bit earlier, if you had to, for any reason, to protect yourself, you got to make sure that blade is razor sharp. The sheath is in good shape. Deployment, if you have a single edge or a single piece knife, is in the proper working functions, and be aware of it. You have to know the grips that you have on it, so if it gets bloody on that, it doesn't slip out of your hands. There's a whole lot of different what ifs on that, to look at when you start getting into the knife anatomies.
Yeah, definitely. Talk a little bit about disarms. We'll go back to disarms, chapter 9. Let's talk a little bit about how unrealistic a lot of this stuff is.
A disarm could be related to a lot of the lock flows that we teach in our empty hand world. You know, if it flows into the position where you can get it and you're aware of it and you've practiced it before, you're probably going to have a better chance in your success ratio of attaining that lock pull will come into play. The same thing applies with the blade. You know, if you understand the blade and the structure of the attacks coming at you, and nothing's going to be perfect in that the bladed world, and your chance of getting dinged, chipped, cut, slashed, filleted, I mean, are going to be heightened. And if it's a sharp knife coming at you, you know, you're going to have to be aware of the size of the blade. The smaller the blade, the tougher it is going to be to deal with. The longer the blade, you're going to have a little bit better chance of seeing it, number one, and feeling the energy from that. And you have to understand your angles. You have to be a little bit more of how to utilize that clock principle, because the margin for error with it is going to be just tighter than tight when we can't get away from it. In Kenpo world, our margin for error is a little bit greater because we can take a punch, we can take an elbow a lot easier. Not that we want to, because it could be one of those that kind of knock it silly if you haven't been training for it. The bladed world, when you start going into a disarm, if you don't move accordingly with that, you know, if it's an overhead and you think you're going to do a quick disarm, they could pull back on you. You have to be aware of how that knife could move and practice those disarms and put yourself in that situation. Now, the success ratio of them is the question you're asking, you know, how likely are they to work? If you're going to shoot just for the disarm, you're probably going to end up getting cut pretty bad. And hopefully you can tell about the story afterwards, but more likely you could be crossing over to the other side. Disarms are fun. They're nice to have into your repertoire. They should be learned because you can use them at times. There's no doubt about it. But to live for that, I think you really need to think twice in that. We see a lot of times people coming in for disarm, try to go for it right away, and then they want to go head hunting right away. We've always been one to state that, hey, you know what? You start with the hands and you disarm the snake, you know, then you can't, you know, get bit by them. You know, then you start working your way on up, you know, so we don't go shooting for the computer right away. You know, we start looking at a smarter way. And that's the same thing. Be aware of how you're going to defend yourself. And you have a laptop on you that you could utilize to help, you know, deflect that blade coming at you, or, you know, a belt or anything, your phone, keys, something that can just detour to buy you that split second you need to retaliate. And like I stated in the book, it's better to have empty hand skills than not, because you need to have something to back it up. And if you don't have it, I think you're going to be hard pressed. The Filipino arts are pretty complete, empty hands included in it. I think if you have Kenpo and you add the Filipino arts to it, I think you're going to get supercharged. That's my own personal opinion, and I think, you know, many others share that too. And I think it's a plus for us in our Kenpo world.
Yeah, I think the issue we have with the Kenpo world with knife techniques is that until you get to a senior level, you don't get to flow. So we have a, you know, problem solution response that is very linear. Here's a problem, here's a solution, like you said, straight to the computer. And then it doesn't always work like that. It's sort of the equivalent of learning your techniques and then you get thrown into sparring. Because that's effectively what you're doing with a knife, right?
Well, I agree. You know, I think what to break it down even easier, you know, we have a learning triangle we talk about. We have a cooperative on top, you know, competitive, and then we go into combative. I think in the top part, in the cooperative point, we start learning that skill set level. That way you're understanding how to get in a flow, what it feels like, how to maneuver. You know, it's like, you know, Mr. Planas always says is don't stop, stopping is wrong. And I think there's a lot to be said with that, understanding that statement and then putting it into application. So you're learning, don't stop, you know, stopping's wrong. You're learning the skill set of how to do a drill. Then you put it in the competitive world. that means start to pressure test it a little bit more. Start giving it resistance, start adding other punches into the game, whether it's a bladed art, throw a cross in there, there's another thing, throw a kick in there, see how you would pressure test it. And that can be at a level that you both agree upon where your levels of expertise are the same or learning are the same or close. Then I think with that being said, you start adding the strategies with those punches, with the pushing, with the pulling along with the blade, and then you start seeing the realities of it. Then you get over to the combative side, then you're going to go a little bit more full-fledged on that. And that's going to be agreed upon again. You want to go full out, to the tilt and hope it's going to, end up in your space. I think you need to work your way into that and start putting your strategies more into an application where it's not such a scenario-based reaction. Or, a lot of times we get hung up in our world, because we're more of a listening type art. A lot of times, do thundering hammers, and then they do thundering hammers, put it into a more spontaneous type environment where you have to react on what's coming to you. The read is what we're losing, I think, in a lot of the aspects of the knife and the stick training.
Let's jump to chapter 7 and let's talk a little bit about wound management.
Wound management, that's, like we're always taught, just because you get cut doesn't mean you're dead. You still have to defend yourself. If you get cut in an area, you can do wound management on 1, 2 max. But keep in mind, your limbs, and depending on what's done on that, is going to be limited as far as usage. You can handle 1 or 2 wound managements, depending on severity of it, but 3 or more, pretty tough. Pretty tough.
I think what people don't realize is that it's hard to do wound management when you're still in the middle of it.
It's extremely hard. It's extremely hard to be able to move. You need, and that's always the tough question. If you're engaged, the longer you're in that situation, if you're in a situation for 3 to 5 seconds, you've gotten stuck, stabbed 3 to 5 times, minimum. And if he sticks in you, you're not going to do wound management in your gut. What's been told to me, and this is from the ER, not just somebody getting stuck, because a lot of times they don't come out of there. They say with a bullet wound versus a knife, plunge, stab, the bullet wound patient has a little bit better chance of surviving than a knife plunge patient. For the reason being, when that blade's in there, it can move around and it can do a lot of damage inside, and you don't know how bad it is and how to take care of it. With a bullet hole, it's going to generally go in. If it hit a bone, could stop, could fragment, could go all the way through. You may have a better shot at it. With that wound management, the biggest thing is to understand if you get sliced and you've got that breather to take care of it, you have to be aware of what's going on and not freak out, number one. Because if you start, chicken little the sky fell, it will fall on you. And that's going to give the other guy a leg up. You have to keep that mental toughness in place. And that's something we don't work on enough. And that's with the pressure testing. You've got to be mentally strong. When you get cut, you get plunged, you're not dead at that moment. If you can do anything you can, if it's on your arm, maybe hold the pressure against your body until you can put a tourniquet on there if you have one. If you have 2 and they're both inside, you're going to be hard pressed. You may want to hold in tight, and this is all, speculation of how the mental game is going to go. Use your legs to kick with, and maybe that's not going to do it. You don't know how tough it's going to be, when you do get stuck. If it's on your neck, you're starting to hit vital areas that, you may not be able to recover from. If you have 1 and done, you may be able to get 2 at once. I don't know that. That's a medical type question, and it's a mental toughness question that you're out in the field. Can you handle that? And that's the biggest question, because you're going to start losing consciousness depending on how fast the adrenaline's going. 2 to 5 seconds, it's done. You're going to the other side pretty quickly.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about psychology of knife defense. And I always keep saying, I think I said this to Sapul, but we were doing a seminar at the camp, and he had, he wanted a knife. So I had the Sharky plastic knife, and then I had the shiny knife. And he went for the red Sharky knife. I said, no, take this. And he says, well, what's the difference? And I said, well, no one respects the plastic knife. They're not scared of it. But as soon as you put a bit of shine on it, we're programmed to run away from that. And he went, okay, yeah, that makes sense. This is I've done in my training, I should say. I've worked with people when we used to remember the rubber tantos that would bend around the corner kind of thing, and they're just black rubber and they don't scare anyone, and people they know they're not going to get cut, so they come in. And I think we're working, I think it was like would have been a blue belt, I reckon. And we had a Asian gentleman. He had a lot of fast muscle twitch fibers. He was quick. So we did a bit of knife stalking, and he just wasn't scared of the knife. I said, your problem is you're not scared of this knife. And he's like, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, okay, let's go. And then I just went to town. But because it was rubber, there's no consequences, and you can't really feel it. And, it would bend and it would move. But those old tantos, they would leave a black mark, like a burnout. Anyway, we finished, and I dragged him into the toilet and showed his face in the mirror, and it looked like he was done and dusted. He had cuts across the front of the throat, the side of the neck. I crossword puzzled his face to prove the point that we really, we think we can go hammer and tong. And I think there's a lot of styles out there that advocate that because they don't have that experience, that, how serious it is with a knife and, waiting. It's like you said, it's like playing a game of pool, which is like Kenpo, but you can't go straight for the computer. You can't go straight for the disarm at times. You have to set that stuff up. And people have a different, I've been to a lot of traditional styles, and they'll teach a knife disarm. I'm just like, he dead, right? You're dead. All right.
Oh, that is the problem. And that's where I have the most, or my biggest issues with that. I see a lot of the empty hand systems teaching knife defense, and they have no understanding of what you just stated. There's no respect level there. We generally use an aluminum blade, or what I'll use a lot of times, I'll use a live blade, and I'll dull it and round it out. So, it's got the weight and the feel of it. And you have to treat it a little bit different, because it's still going to hurt if you stab. I mean, so you're playing at a higher level there. I don't suggest people do that right off the get-go, and you can't stop any from doing it. So I'm not an advocate of doing that, and I don't want to advocate it, here on the show. But I do promote, the usage of something that's got a little bit more substance to it, so you get a better understanding and respect level for that blade. And so many times people lose that respect, and they know it's not going to cut them. And that is a problem. I remember one time when I first started doing the blades, I think it was probably the 80s, early 80s, 81. We were at my mom and dad's, and Huck was there. And we were going through some knife work. And he had this blade, it looked real. And he put it right against my neck. And I'm thinking, and I'd just been with him for, a year or two. So I'm thinking, oh man, I got one of the craziest instructors there is now. Going to cut my throat open right in my mom and dad's living room before we eat. And he's looking, he says, you know how a knife works, don't you? I said, I don't know, sir. He says, it cuts when you draw, and he drew it across my neck. And it was one of those Gil Hibben daggers, stilettos, but he dulled it out. And he goes, here, it was my birthday that day. He goes, happy birthday, boy.
Happy birthday, go change your pants.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Then my mom and dad are yelling, come on, you guys, get in here and eat. But I'll never forget that. But I do like the idea of using something that's a little bit more realistic. So you get a feel, especially when you start disarming and you start working it. The old rubber ones, nah, The Sharkies, I'm not a fan of the Sharkies, never have been. I'd rather use the aluminums. We've used some, I can't remember the brand it is, but we used it in the Dog Brothers, but it's got a real hard core and it's kind of a foam covering, but man, when that thing hits you, it hurts. So you don't want to be hit by it. But in the same breath, you're gaining a respect. You're not trying to manhandle something and try to finesse it a little bit more if you can, and be more target specific when you start working the blade. And a lot of times we're not. When we do an empty hand art, we're a little bit more broad based when we're doing our movements with the blade. Like I was talking earlier, you asked about is we're learning how to keep it in tighter and work that tightness and use your body mechanics along with that. But a big thing there is the positioning. You don't want to be stuck in the inside, for very long.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about personal experiences with a knife and self-defense. So let's talk a little bit about some of your memories so we can illustrate some of the concepts of your book.
With the blade work, you want to, I worked down in the border, the Mexican-American border, for a lot of years. And of course, down there, nothing's sacred. Knives come out, hatchets come out, sticks come out, broken bottles come out. You try to avoid it as much as possible. And I mean that very sincerely. Sometimes you can't, you're getting stuck into it, but there's always something that, you can interfere and create a disruption, on the way there. And you're getting a lot of times people just have anger, issues that come out, because their trucks don't get loaded on time and, things didn't go quite their way and they're having to wait. But we've ran into that several times. We run into people, pulling guns, but a lot of times when we've noted that they pull it, it's more of a flexing type of situation that we've seen down there. I think in the battlegrounds, that's a different ball game. I've seen a few things that shouldn't be, and I think those sites, those stories are better off not talked about a whole lot, to encourage somebody, to stay away from it more than to get into it. A lot of times, the blade, when it does come out and you have a situation, it's hard to diffuse those situations. It really is. If the guy's got the intent to come at you, there's times that you can diffuse those situations, by being smart about it too, and try to position yourself smartly and getting them to calm down a little bit. Just because you've got the ability to maybe disarm and maybe take it away, doesn't mean you have to come back at them and retaliate. That doesn't put you in a better position. Martial arts should be thought of for that. It's for the preservation of life, not for the taking of life. So we're not teaching people how to be an assassin when you're dealing with a bladed type situation or you're dealing with a weapon type, adversary. If you get somebody on the street, it's a different story. You may have to address it, but that doesn't mean you have to kill them either. In a militaristic type situation, that's a different ballgame. But, still there's a set criteria you need to go through.
So do you have a favorite knife or style of knife?
It's funny you say that. Wes Hibben just made me a knife, and that's my new favorite. Let me see if I can get it. This is my new favorite knife. Okay. I think you see it. It's but I had him design it. He put my logo on it and everything, and it's the top of the blade is sharp also because there's a slicing, and then there's the drawing of it too. So I wanted it to be
Just hold it in front of your chest so that the background doesn't. Yeah, a little bit higher. That's it. There you go. Yep. That's a typical Marty Z knife.
Yeah, and it really fits my hand, and Wes had it, form fitted for me. When I saw him in Las Vegas, we had that out. Although aimed at aperture.
That's a live blade, right?
That's a live blade.
Okay, nice.
Yeah, it's really, it's got the weight to it. It's got the sharpness on both sides. And he really did a nice job on it. And he did it to spec, so I could utilize it as a double edge and a single edge, depending on how I wanted to use it. And the different type of grips I wanted to accomplish and being utilized for that purpose. Whether it's point down, point up, where I'd be filleting with it or stabbing with it or slicing with it. It gave me the ability to understand the weapon. We train a lot, intermixed weapons. We do a lot of different type of pressure testing with different type weapons against different type weapons at the academy. So we get a higher success ratio when we start trying to do disarms, or we try to go into different flow type drills and approach it. And the weights of the weapons, I mean, everything's going to give you a different perspective on how to handle it. And you've got to be, adverse enough to be able to pick up that flow from that type of weapon, whether it's one that you can snap into place or one that you just have to flow through and follow through with it because of the weight is too heavy and you can't, rechamber it right away. So it's an understanding of weaponry and how to apply it. That comes into the strategies of what you would use, how you use it, and then you have your own favorites. It's like in Kenpo, you got your techniques that are your go-tos, that you're having your favorites, and you have the ones you least like, but we still do it because we need to. The same thing applies into the weapons that you utilize.
So is that specifically just for yourself, or is that going to be a knife that's going to be available for others?
We talked about that, and right now it can be available if somebody wanted to purchase it and have and make a copy of that.
Okay. And how would they go
I'll
about
bring it
doing
to
that?
camp.
Okay. And is that called, it's called the Z?
Yeah, I think he called the Z knife. I don't know. He put my logo on it, and so he's called it all kinds of things with me. But it's we're having dinner when he was designing it, so it was kind of fun.
Let me ask you a question. The cover of the book. You have a knife on the cover of the book.
Mm-hmm.
It's the folder with the red highlight in the handle. Is there any significance in that knife on the book?
I like the blade because it was similar to the fixed blade that I had here. I wanted the red because of the impact of the knife and what it can do, and it shows that, it's up close personal type weapon, and the red is signifying, the results of utilizing that knife, and heaven forbid if you have to, but I liked it for that. And I wanted to put it in stone. So, it was making a point, and that point being that, what, you don't want to abuse a blade, and I left it in stone because it's stuck in there. And if you have to use it, you have to really have that mindset of being able to put it into play.
I knew there'd be a reason. I thought that might have been your everyday carry, that one, but
Well, now, it's funny because we're always told not to carry a knife, and Guru Inosanto will stress that. I don't want you guys carrying a knife. He says, because if you do deploy it, it'll come out too fast and you're going to be target specific, and you may be sorry you drew it that fast and utilized it that quickly. And then you have a lot of trouble to explain yourself on. You should have empty hand skills that can take you there. But if you do need it, you do have the ability for it too.
For our listeners, what takeaways from the book would you emphasizing them to go out and buy the book? and learn all about all the different concepts and principles that you've spent time sharing with us in the book. What takeaways would you give to them?
The purpose of the book was for this, to give an understanding how the knife evolved, from the beginning of times and how it went through the ages and the materials, just to give you a history of what a knife really is. You think about back in the stone man, in the caveman era, it was a stone they sharpened, but would they go attack a dinosaur with it? No, they probably have a sling type motion that they put it hooked onto a stick and a spear, probably to protect themselves. So it's evolved from that point. So I think the history is good to know. I didn't go extremely in depth, but I gave you just a quick overview of it. To understand the evolution of the knife, how it came, and it was mostly a tool, then it changed more to a weapon because the ease of attainment. I think that's important takeaway. I think the understanding of how to be aware of knives and what they can do and the different type of striking patterns that can be used from it. And I included that in there too. I think it's going to give you a good overview of what to look for and to add to your martial arts training. I hope it opens doors to the empty hand martial artists to give them an idea or plant a seed, at the very least, to go in and visiting a Filipino type environment where they start to compare their structure of what they have in the empty hand arts. And I don't care what empty hand art they have. It makes no difference. What does make a difference is I'm trying to get across, have a broader based understanding of when you're teaching a student empty hand self-defense against a bladed weapon, and you haven't really had formalized training in that world, and you're giving them a false sense of being. And that was one of the biggest thoughts that I had when I wrote the book, because I wanted people to understand that there's a difference. And when you're teaching an empty hand art and how to disarm a weapons from an empty hand type mentality, granted, it's better than nothing, but you need to really educate yourself a little bit more, because most people are not going to get in a fight or have to call upon their skills to disarm a bladed, attacker or a person with a stick or a club. It's more than likely not going to happen, but it could. It could very well, and depends on the areas that you're going to, that it could happen. So that's what I wanted people to walk away with, just to get a better grip to raise their success ratio up when they're starting to get their studies going to deal with weaponry in their empty hand martial arts.
So do you have any words of wisdom? I know you got a heap of it through the book in regards specifically to the book and knife that you could share with our listeners.
I think my advice would be pretty much what we've been talking about all the way through. I think our empty hand skills, and I can speak for our Kenpo, are pretty good. I really believe they're top notch. We've got a good, vast understanding of our Kenpo motion. We have a vast understanding of the strategies that are included in it. I think our skill levels in Kenpo, for the most part, for most people, are really good. I think our weaponry needs to be revisited, because I think we're missing some of the key points in there when it comes to the disarming, the motions of morality type usage with the weapon. And I believe that with a little bit of study and a little bit of education, it'll enhance your skill level and your skill set to a higher mark, which I think is second to none.
Do you have any mantras you can share?
I think the mantra is this, and I don't even know if it's a mantra or not. I think the ability to keep yourself humble and keep learning and to absorb more information coming in, and you'll discern what's going to work for you or not work for you. I think that's a key point, and I think we miss that a lot of times. We're trying to live in a memorized world and get an understanding of our world. I think we need to keep adding to it And it's the old saying, you know, when you get your moves, and we hear this down at the academy, and Mr. Inosanto will say this a lot. He says, you know what you did and some of the moves that we've done in the 50s and 60s, some of it has become obsolete. And we need to continually advance our art so we can understand and be more in tune to the times that we're in now. No different than Mr. Parker did. I mean, he didn't stop his efforts into making a better art and to giving us a brain to think about it, because he gave us the abs and the tools to work with that we could venture off. And I think with the empty hands, I think the versus weapons, I think it's going to enhance what you do, you know, by studying more and keeping an open mind to those teachings.
Right. And do you have any words of wisdom for our listeners as we close out the session?
Words of wisdom is practice, study, ask questions, laugh at yourself when you make mistakes. That's what the training floor is for in the dojo. And I think too many times we get too serious with ourselves and we forget, especially as we get higher in rank, you know, we're putting ourselves in a position, and I think it's self-imposed, a lot of it, to have all the answers and to have, you know, the proper sage for the moments, because we're considered to be all that to everybody what we can provide. And I think keeping that open mind and that open channel to be able to say, hey, I can make this better, you know, than I was the day before. I think that's huge.
Okay. All right. Well, I think that brings us to the end of our episode. It's been great. Always great to see you and talk to you. This is a little bit different to how we normally are. Normally, when I see you, get to stab me a few times. So good from my end, not getting stabbed. But
See each other in a couple months. I'm sure you'll remember all this in 2 months' time.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's a pleasure. Thank you for having me on and allowing me to share some of my insights on the book and the writings on it.
So for our listeners, the book's available on Amazon, Edge of Reality Evolution by Marty Zananovich, Sifu Z. We'll put some links in the show notes to the book. Excellent book if you want to learn anything about the blade.
Thank you.
And if anyone's interested in reaching out to you, sir, are you open to people reaching out?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But yeah, get on the book, buy a copy, and we'll put some links in the show notes to reaching out to Sifu Z. All right, well, thank you, Marty Zananovich, all the way from Los Angeles, California, USA, for joining us on the Mind Sensei podcast and sharing your knowledge and a review of the book, The Edge of Reality Evolution. Thank you for joining us, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Peter. It's always a pleasure chatting with you and sharing time with you. It's always fun.
We'll see you in a few months' time.
Sounds good. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, we'll talk to you then.